All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Ask Me Anything panel of experts. Fighting some technical difficulties with the platform, and we'll see how it goes. Let's introduce ourselves briefly, and we'll go around the horn here. We'll see if Chris and his technical difficulties are resolved, and then we'll jump in. If you do have questions, please submit them through the Q&A widget. I see a bunch of things in there, and we will dive in and take it from the top. So I'm Jason Garbus. I'm a principal at a firm called Numberline Security, focused on zero trust and helping enterprises to define, prepare for, and execute on effective zero trust strategies. I'm also co-chair of the Zero Trust Working Group and spent a lot of time with the folks on this panel and the folks on the call, as well as with the CSA. And love talking about zero trust, so I'm really looking forward to this. Shruti.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, all. I'm Shruti Kulkarni. I'm a cybersecurity architect with 6.6. So I work with anything that's related to security, you name it. I work with policies, standards, procedures, technical guidelines, technical security controls, etc. And from a CSA perspective, I lead the identity and data pillars for Zero Trust Working Group. And I'm really very happy to be here answering questions on the live panel of CSA ZT experts. Thank you. Jerry, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Shruti. I am Jerry Chapman. I'm a director at a security organization. I am a CSA co-chair of the Zero Trust Working Group. I have spent the last 25 years in identity, the last 8 years focused on what I would say zero trust. And love talking about zero trust, love talking and having these conversations. This is probably the most fun I have whenever I talk about zero trust, because it's an open playing field.
All right, fantastic. Thank you all. So there are a lot of questions coming in, which is great. So in semi-random order, let's talk about one that you're going to love. So from Brian M., how do you get past the initial roadblock of the name, I guess the term zero trust? When you mention, quote, zero trust, unquote, you get, okay, Brian, you're overstating this a little bit, immediate looks of fear and concern. I don't know if we always see fear and concern, but okay, I'll grant you concern, Brian, around that nobody's going to be able to access anything. And then if you attempt to explain this in detail to calm their fears, stressing the positive aspects, then sometimes it falls on deaf ears and people say, well, we can't do that here. So let's jump into that. I think we've all experienced this, and there definitely is concern, maybe fear. We lost Chris around this.
So, well, I'm not generalizing this point, but sometimes people may end up thinking that zero trust means no access. Well, with no access, you cannot do any business. So what zero trust really means is that the right entity has the right access to the right resource at the right time from the right location. So work it out this way, and I'm sure zero trust will work for you instead of you working for zero trust.
I love everything that everyone said, and I'll just add just a simple two things, right? One, I will say zero trust doesn't mean zero trust. It means no implicit trust. And that's something I think is very, very important to understand when you start thinking about zero trust. And my favorite thing when I hear this conversation is I'll just talk about zero trust in 12 different ways without even saying the word zero trust. And it still comes across very effective and takes that stereotype, that paradigm out of the conversation.
Yeah, I think that I definitely agree with that. And if you think that there's going to be fear or concern around the term, don't use that term. You have our permission. Call it network transformation, call it modern security, call it, spicy tacos. It doesn't matter. The important thing is, are you getting the principles in there and are you moving your organization forward? That's the important thing. And we've definitely seen organizations that call it deliberately something else in order to exactly to avoid that. All right, let's see.
So I see one here, Jason. Mikhail C. I think I hope I'm not butchering your name. I apologize if I am. I'm horrible at that. But here's the question I see, Jason. Other than CISA's zero trust maturity model, what other models or framework like Gartner's Security Access Service Edge exists that an organization can use to adopt zero trust, thus an action plan to evolve towards zero trust?
Chris, you want to answer that?
Well, you go ahead and start, because I'm still trying. I understand that people are having
Okay.
troubles hearing me. So
Let me take that question. Okay, so we have a very defined maturity model from CSA, but of course there is a lot of thought leadership and guidance from DoD, from NSTAC, and NIST, and other organizations. Now the key thing, and of course we have got a lot of thought leadership from Cloud Security Alliance as well. So the key thing to remember here is that we can use the maturity model when we start implementing zero trust. So the first thing is to begin with zero trust. And as Jason mentioned earlier, call it anything you want. Spicy tacos is a very nice name to use for it. But, start. And then you can look for the maturity models. And of course, sometimes you may not even need to refer to these maturity models. You will notice that, 1 year down the line during the journey, you would have progressed so much. So you can have your own maturity model around that. So, but having said that, yes, there is a lot of thought leadership available from a lot of, authoritative sources. So, yes, by all means use CISA maturity model, but also refer to other authoritative sources.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
I think that's really good guidance. And we like the system maturity model because it's really well understood. If you want to use another maturity model, whether it's DoD or another, I think that's fine. I think the only caution we would add is really, I think, applicable to all the maturity models, which is don't just orient your zero trust initiative around improving your security. And I know maybe that sounds counterintuitive, but improving security is important, of course. And the maturity models are great ways to organize yourselves and to measure yourselves. But ultimately, you want and you need to deliver business value and help your coworkers achieve the mission of your business in a way that is secure. That's how you're going to get support for your ongoing zero trust initiative.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, again, I'll go with the idea that a maturity model is great, but it's not one size fits all, and none of them are one size fits all. And don't get your head wrapped around this idea that if we don't fit into this bucket, that we're not taking and making measurable impact on our overall security. That's nonsense, right? Find, if you're going to use a maturity model, find one that fits, basically what you're trying to do. Understands that they're made to be one size fits all, and we all know how unrealistic that is. And then take and adapt it and understand that I'm going to go against what Jason is saying. I'll say that improving your security is always important, right? I think that when you're looking at zero trust, having those incremental, spots, even take it like from 1 to 5, nobody is starting their zero trust journey at 0. And that's one of those very common misperceptions. I think that a lot of people think that we have to do all of this at once, so on and so forth. It's a parallel process. You're doing a lot of different things, and taking and understanding where you are, at ground zero. It's actually a really hard part. Doing that initial assessment based on a maturity model, based on somebody coming in to help you, whatever have you. I think that's an important place to start, but nobody's starting at 0. I mean, everybody talks about this greenfield idea. The reality of it is that you're using Active Directory, you're using some kind of identity, you're probably using some kind of device control. You're already doing a lot of these things. So don't discount the progress that you've already made, right? There's a lot of interesting things out there that you're probably already doing. Assess those, figure out what your next steps are, and then make it apply however you're going to apply. Know that we love you, right? We want to be able to help you, and you can use the Jason, Shruti, Jerry, and Chris model if you'd like, and we'll tell you that you're in great shape too, right? So, I mean, again, don't feel like you got to get your head wrapped around, the system maturity model, any other ones that you're going to see. Understand what works for you, and feel that you are going to be empowered to make incremental steps forward. Don't eat. One of the topics we'll talk about all day today is eating the elephant, right? Zero trust is a process, and you cannot eat the elephant all at once. It is something that you got to eat in pieces, a little bit at a time. I hope that you really like elephant, because it's going to take a little time. Zero trust is the same way. And so once you start the process, it actually builds upon yourself, and then you can demonstrate that you are adding business value, that you are making progress. And that's what your business leaders are really looking for.
And I'll take that everything, I love everything everyone said, and I'll just go a little bit further, right? The one thing that I talk about when we start talking about zero trust maturity models or references or how to get, and this is where I want to really start to focus on how to get from one maturity to the next, right? First thing I will say is as cybersecurity, as really just a cybersecurity paradigm, that's what zero trust is, right? It's just a cybersecurity paradigm. You're consistently evolving. The threat actors are always evolving, so you're going to be evolving your architecture. You're going to be evolving your technologies. You're going to be continuously evolving. But what I will say is, don't get stuck in the 1 to 5, as Chris was saying, that you have to get to 5. You don't have to get to 5. You have to get to where
probably may not get to 5. I mean, that's exactly the part that you have to remember. A 5 is this weird idyllic state that, God, between us, we have 100 years experience doing cybersecurity to the 4 of us on this call. I don't know anybody that on all the different aspects of cybersecurity and zero trust are 5s across the board. And if you are, where are you? Because I'd like to talk to you, right? I mean,
yeah,
there really isn't that thing. So don't get your head wrapped around this idea that, a 2 is horrible. A 2 is not horrible. A 2 is awesome, right? Especially if you started at a 1 and your goal is to get a 3, being at 2, that's sweet. All right, let's take and figure out what we need to do to get to 3. 5 is this stretch goal that, quite frankly, and excuse my French, is bullshit. You probably are never going to get there, but that's okay. That's perfectly okay. The progress that you're making to get to 3, maybe even 4 some point, that's great. Okay,
and Chris,
it's all good.
Let me just say you're dead on, and I love it, right? Because I think we all have that same passion. And what I will say is, you might be a 5 in one element. There is a lot of different facets to zero trust.
That's right.
And you might be a 5 in one, you might be in a 1 in another, you might be 3 in another, but it really, really does become a matter of what are you trying to accomplish as a business, and where do you fit, and how do you go forward?
Preach it.
Right, exactly. And this isn't something where you can declare victory, because as soon as you say, hey, we're a 5, let's take the rest of the week off, the business is going to change. There's going to be an M&A, or there's going to be a new line of business or a new technology that you're going to adopt. So that's the fun part here, is securely enabling the business to make these changes and do what it needs to do to survive and thrive.
One of the questions that Vanya just asked is, what's the difference? What's 1 to 5, right? 1, just think of it as, 1 being the noobs in the room and 5 being the zero trust gods, right? They're and everything in between, right? I am not too really, you can define them however you want. 5 is the most mature processes that meet whatever guidelines or controls that you're trying to meet. The reality of it is, 1 is you're really at your start spot, and 3 is that you're a sane middle ground when it's all said and done. You're relatively mature, you have room to grow, you've accomplished a lot. Use that guidance for whatever you want. You can do it at scale 1 to 10, you can do a scale from 1 to 100.
Forget the numbers, right?
Exactly.
Forget the numbers. The numbers are not important. I think we get wrapped around the axle way too often when we start talking about, well, I'm a 3 and I need to be a 4. No, forget the numbers. Think about what you're trying to accomplish as a business. Think about what your attack surface looks like, and John will love this. What is your protect surface? Think about what that looks like, and then move forward from there. And that's what you have to focus on, not this arbitrary numbering system or elevation from one point to another in the maturity models.
Exactly. Define where you are currently. Check where you are next year, and then that will show you how much you have progressed over the 1 year.
That's right.
And that's progress.
Exactly. All right, let's move on. And
there was a comment. I'll try to be less exciting, but this is something that I'm very excited about. So, I apologize for being overly enthusiastic, but this is something that is very important that we all need to understand. And if you haven't figured out that I'm passionate about it, maybe you're in the wrong session, because we all 4 of us, I know, because we've all worked together for a long time, we're all very passionate about it. My beard is just louder than theirs.
But we love the beard, Chris.
Let's see. Okay, so someone's asking about what might a zero trust environment look like for a company that's say 100% remote workers with a usage of SaaS, PaaS, and infrastructure as a service. So let's shape that a little bit. This comes from Kenneth. Let's say that the organization doesn't have an enterprise network and doesn't have any traditional on-premises type of resources, but let's say they make heavy use of SaaS and a little bit of platform and infrastructure as a service. that's a great environment. I think that zero trust is very highly applicable there, perhaps in maybe easier ways than on-prem. But Shruti, you want to start off and answer that?
Sure. So when we start talking about zero trust in a really distributed enterprise environment, we may want to look at how exactly we want to secure our I don't want to use the protect surface because we've been using it a lot, but what is it that we are trying to protect? So for example, any organization will have several departments. Like we've got an HR department, we've got a sales department, we've got I don't know, internal IT department, and then of course there's a business department. So for remote workers and all that, they intersect with so many departments like HR and IT and all. So when we talk about that, is the person from HR department trying to access only those applications that are meant for their HR business? I think that's where we can start off, and we can define our protect surface from there, and then build out how exactly is a remote worker then going to reach out to those HR applications that are deployed as a part of SaaS, and then say that, hey, we are going to allow only through, say, SASE, for example. I'm not saying everybody should use it or it fits in everybody's delivery model, but SASE, or we might say, hey, we will only use, the SaaS, we'll connect directly to the SaaS application, but we will use multi-factor authentication or maybe something else along with it. So the key thing is to decide what you want to protect, how you want to allow access to your remote resources, and then how you want to secure that access. I think that's where we can start off with.
Chris or Jerry, any further comments on that one?
I'll just add, I think the cloud native environments, as you start to think about an enterprise that may have no enterprise network, right? As it's all 100% a remote environment. The cloud platforms provide the capability inherently to support zero trust. If you have to do guardrails, let's be very clear. If you take the approach of my infrastructure as a service or my platform as a service is exactly like my old on-prem environment, because you may end up a lot of administrators that are used to an on-prem environment. They're trying to manage manage a cloud-based environment that may look like an on-prem environment, which isn't quite an on-prem environment. So it's really understanding the guardrails in the cloud environment to support what you really need to do in the cloud environment to support it. I'm an identity guy, right? So I talk about identity all the time. And quite frankly, if you are efficiently managing the identities in the cloud, tell me a cloud provider where you're not getting to the information based on an identity, whether it's a machine, a user, a service, they're getting to the cloud environment through an identity. So that is 100% a core competency that you have to develop to make that successful. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Again, this is one of those places where you can phone a friend, right? Take and ask your cloud provider how to take and their best practices using the tools that are native to their environments to implement zero trust. They have this documentation. I don't know of any of them that don't, right? I mean, AWS, Azure, Google, they all have plenty of documentation and plenty of experts that'll be able to help you. Your environment's going to be a little bit different. I understand that, and that's fine. Take and start there, figure out their best practices on what tools to best use. But to echo what Jerry and Shruti both said, you're talking about an environment that was basically created with zero trust in mind. So those tools are there, those processes are there, they're native to the platforms, and taking and having the ability to implement those things in a cloud environment should actually be almost second nature to accessing that environment at all.
Yeah, I think certainly these platforms are very highly capable, and one of the best parts about them is they are very rich from an API perspective. So there's no excuse for not knowing what's on your network or not having understanding or visibility into your workloads, where in traditional on-prem environments, there's lots of excuses for that because this stuff has been ignored for decades in some cases. I think the important thing is to utilize the forward-looking and more modern aspects of those platforms. So utilize standards-based identity integration for authentication, for example. Utilize the adaptive and policy-based security controls. Don't utilize the old-fashioned capabilities of those platforms that were put in there for situations where you've got a modern IaaS environment that's glued to your enterprise network, and you're using security groups based on IP addresses. For goodness sake, don't use that. Use the control points that are more zero trust focused, and you'll be in good shape. Yeah. All right, let's see. Here's a question that I think is interesting. Let me find the right wording. Is it required, or does, I think I lost track of it. It says, it was essentially, are you required to have a strong IAM foundation in place before you start with zero trust?
Oh my God, can I take that? I love the question. So, I mean, everybody who's participating in this, discussion, you can all correct me if I'm wrong, but anything and everything requires access and an identity before you conduct something with it. Mm-hmm. And things happen, sometimes good things, sometimes bad things, but they all start with an access that is either wrongly configured or it is obtained maliciously. So to make sure that the entity that is requesting access to a resource is authenticated and authorized before being granted that access, it's very important to have a strong IAM system in place.
So
everybody else.
I'm going to jump in because, like you, Shruti, this is one of my favorite questions, and I almost live in this space half the time. First off, I want to say this: strong is a relative term. It's relative to the organization, and you could have just enough identity to do the job that you're trying to do to provide the access that you need. Could you improve that? Absolutely. Could you bring in more signals to drive more context-based security? Absolutely. Some organizations will tell you a strong identity program is a strong role-based access control program. If anyone has ever heard me talk, how I talk about role-based access control. I don't like it. And I don't like it because we haven't done it well for the past 20 years. But if you are doing role-based access control and you have a program that is managed the role-based access control, now you're doing exactly what Shruti said. You're providing the right identity to the right access, or with the right access at the right time. And that's enough. One thing that Jason and I have talked about in the past is you don't have to have a complete 100% overarching identity program to start a zero trust conversation. It is an opportunity to enhance and improve your identity program. And I would almost say, hey, take that opportunity to do that, because when you need those additional signals, when you need that context-based access control or policy-based access control, when you need those elements to really drive more security, then build it out and then use it. Use the zero trust narrative to start bringing that as a core part of what you're trying to do. Jason and Chris, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, no, I'll just add one last thing, and that's the same thing that you always talk about, Jerry, is that no matter what you do, start, right? I mean, you got to start somewhere. And even if you're starting out with, Bob's House of Identity, and the most bargain basement identity solution that there is, that's a start. You'll find out very quickly that maybe a next level identity provider is going to better situate or suit your environment. And so then you migrate, right? And then you do the next thing. But starting somewhere that is cost productive, starting somewhere that gives you the basic identity solution, identity access that you need, you got to start somewhere. And so my recommendation, and I know Jerry has preached this from the mountaintops, is that start somewhere, start with whatever identity provider makes the most sense. And then as you go on, you'll experience where that one might be lacking, where you might need additional capabilities, whatever have you. But again, it's the first bite of the elephant, to continue that metaphor as we go on. I
think we need to move away and not talk about eating elephants and talk about I don't know, some other metaphor here. I'm a little uncomfortable with this.
I use boil the ocean one pot at a time. Hey,
But yep,
Boiling
boil
the
the
ocean
ocean.
is another bad analogy. I'm sorry. We need to come up with a better one. So from my perspective, it's definitely not necessary to have a perfect or what you consider as a strong identity program.
Yep.
We all would love to have that. And if you have a weak identity program and you have poor processes and poor data and 10 times as many groups as you have users and things like that, that's a problem and something that you have to work on. It shouldn't preclude you from starting work on zero trust. And the key thing to think about is you don't have to get that identity foundation perfect before you start. Look at the NSTAC report, look at the 5-step process and define one protect surface and one application and one small group of users. Maybe you've got 10,000 users in your organization, but you've only got 200 system administrators and you've only got this small area of 50 production servers, whatever it is. You can take that slice and you can say, all right, I'm going to work on protecting these users and I'm going to add MFA to this based on context, et cetera. And that's a terrific starting point, even if the rest of your identity processes are still pretty immature.
Excellent.
All right, so there's a couple of good questions here. None of them are easy, but okay. So here's one from Amy. Since zero trust includes many security elements, can you provide any enterprise security architectures or frameworks as a reference to leverage for identifying the gaps and to do re-architecture in an enterprise level? So I think she's asking more about the enterprise architecture side than the maturity model side.
Can I take that?
Oh yeah, please, because I don't know how to answer it right now.
Thank you. So I think zero trust is a way of thinking. It's a mindset. It's not a technology. It's a framework. So yes, there are. Any organization would have security controls in place. They would have IAM, data discovery processes, and data protection processes and all that. I think the key thing is, again, I go back to my earlier statement, identify what you want to secure and then see how you are going to make sure that you address the basic principle of authorizing and authenticating an entity before granting them the access, and then bring your security controls closer around that, so that you're not denying access to anybody, because you don't want to do that as a part of the restructuring of your security controls, but you want to make sure that the right entity has the right access at the right time to the right resource and from the right place. So reorganize your security controls to meet these principles. That's what I would like to say.
I'll throw an answer out there because these two guys are not going to do it.
Oh, come on. I'm ready. I'm joking.
Jason and Jerry wrote a book called Zero Trust Security. And in that book is a lot of baselines and guidelines that you can take and look at that will give you really, really good starting points as to proper architecture. Is it a complete architectural diagram? It is not. And it was never designed to be. But when you're taking and looking at understanding how the basics work in an architected infrastructure environment for zero trust, it's as good a place as any. In fact, quite bluntly, it's one of the best places that I know to at least start to look. So use that framework to take and get started in developing an architecture that makes the most sense for you. Lots of other guidance and guidelines out there, not only from the CSA, but just out there in general. Take a look at those. But again, you don't have to do this alone. There's a lot of different solutions and possibilities out there. And again, just very bluntly, if you are really looking for more guidance than that, Jason, Jerry, Shruti, and I are always available on LinkedIn. I answer questions all the time, right? Ping us, let us know. If we have a question that we can't answer, if one of the four of us can't answer it, then you probably have some pretty significant problems anyway. But we will do our dangest to try to help you find some of those answers.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the shout out, Chris. That's very kind. And what Jerry and I tried to do in our book was we tried to distill down architectural patterns around zero trust. And the NIST 800-207 document called Zero Trust Architectures is also a good starting point. They outline 4 common architectures that are in use in varying degrees of acceptance in the industry. This is definitely, it's a hard question that you pose, Amy, because there's a very thin line between talking about architectures and then talking about products that you have in place, because vendors have very different architectures. There are some common patterns and common things, but it's oftentimes very difficult to have a concrete, really substantive conversation about architecture without, and staying away from, I'm using vendor X or vendor Y for this.
So I can't agree. And yeah, thank you, Chris. That's obviously, thanks for the shout out. Obviously appreciated. And the 800-207 document, awesome. I mean, it gives you that logical zero trust architecture. I'm going to kind of go back a little bit and get to a little more granular, I think, because as you start thinking about how to do this and how to apply this across the enterprise architecture, I think the 5 steps documentation within the Instack document is a great place to figure that out, because the goal of that is really to take a look at what you're trying to protect. What is it you're truly trying to protect? Whether it's a critical business system, it's a small business system, it's a subset of users. It gives you that capability to start thinking about what is it I'm actually trying to do, and then all the other stuff will fall into place, right? The technology will start to fall in place. The frameworks that those technologies and ultimately vendor support will start to fall into place. And then you can kind of see where that lays out. I mean, I could rehearse that 5-step for you, but I'm not going to do that here. But let's go take a look at that.
Well, and one last thing too, every single one of the solutions that you have in your environment today, again, if they don't have zero trust architecture guidance already, they likely have been thinking about it, right? I mean, that's one of the great parts about it being so prevalent out there in the industry, is that everybody's thinking about this a little bit. Again, phone a friend. You're spending good money on this solution. Ask them to give you some guidance as to the best practices to implement this into a zero trust environment. There's a pretty good chance that they have a document that they'll send you 10 seconds later that lays out exactly what you're looking for.
Great. I see we have the the countdown timer here. So you got 5 minutes left. So there's 2 questions. Let's talk about, there's a question about non-human or non-person identities and how that works with zero trust. So let's touch on that. And then there's one final question that someone posed, which I think will be great to end with. But so let's talk about non-person entities. Who wants to kick that off?
I'll go.
Sure.
I mean,
Okay.
just like anything, you got to account for them as well, right? Computers are people too, right? And so you got to take and understand how those entities, devices, computers, servers, network devices, whatever have you, how they play in your environment, what permissions those devices actually have. Strangely enough, and let's set our Wayback Machine, many of those devices sometimes are the most authoritative devices that and have the most authoritative permissions in your entire environment, either through some legacy that they needed to be admins or whatever have you. And so understanding how those interact in your environment is just as important as, Jerry, Jason, Shruti, and Chris, right? I mean, it's very, very important to understand what permissions and what those devices are allowed to do.
I would also add on to it, saying that it's always good to have a database of the identities in use. I know it is not a very easy task to do, especially with all the CI/CD pipelines where identities are created as a part of your infrastructure as code, scripts. So it is not really very easy. But I think it is always good to have, so that way what identity has access to the resources.
Yep.
I know we are running short on time, so yeah, Jason and Jerry, over to you.
All right. Yeah. No, thank you. I think that for non-person identities, it's definitely important to look at that as there may be a whole nother world of system monitoring access or network infrastructure access or data backup and recovery server access that hasn't been traditionally or isn't part of the security domain, and it really needs to be, because these are, as we've seen from things like the SolarWinds breach, entry points that attackers are looking to exploit. Okay, so we got 2.5 minutes, and there's a great question here. What's the one thing about zero trust that you've changed your mind on?
I saw that question pop up. It scared me too. This could literally be a conversation in of itself. I'll just go very briefly. When I started really looking at zero trust, I really had a network belief of it, and you can't really just do one thing and expect to get zero trust. It's the same thing about the idea that you take and go to a conference like RSA or so on and so forth, and people are selling you zero trust in a box. I promise you that that's not true. That is absolutely not realistic. It is a holistic solution, and you have to really get your head around the idea that it isn't just the one thing that you're comfortable with. It's a whole bunch of different things, but taking and embracing a whole bunch of those different things will make your security better.
Great.
I would say that, having worked in PCI DSS background, I really love the idea of a product surface. Group your data assets, services, and applications together and protect them. So I think that's a starting point of the zero trust journey. I love the idea about that.
All right. So from my perspective, I think that what I changed my mind on was realization that security can't be the only value around zero trust. I've certainly seen organizations where they put a lot of time and effort and money into it, and they say, fantastic, we improved our security, but they get rejected by the business, and the business says, no, we're not going to use this. Either our application developers aren't going to adopt it, or our users hate this, or whatever it is, or we simply refuse to do this because it's not oriented in a way that delivers business value and make things easier for the end users. Jerry.
So I'll put this out there that I only say in very closed environments. So I'm giving this out to the world, right? I think zero trust has changed my mind around. If you think about the OSI model, there's 7 layers in the OSI model. I say there's 10 layers in it. There's 8, 9, and 10, and I'll talk about that all day long. And it extends beyond the network. So to Chris's point, it's that the zero trust extends beyond the network, and there's multiple layers to support it. And I'll stop there.
We got to tell us what 8, 9, and 10 are, Jerry. You can't leave us in suspense.
Okay, I can't drop the bomb. I was hoping to get the conversation. 8 is applications, 9 is data, 10 is people. We'll stop there.
Right. The last thing that I would share too, Jason, when I really was looking at zero trust, you have it in your head that it's this huge, gigantic thing. And our good friend, Mr. Kindervog and Dr. Cunningham have both really drilled in our head over the last several years that it really doesn't have to be that way. And it really shouldn't be that way. If you think that it is complicated, you're making it that way, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, on that, we can't really debate that further. I would love to, but thank you all, Shruti, Chris, Jerry. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to the CSA for hosting this live part of the event. And as Chris mentioned, feel free to reach out to all of us on LinkedIn. We're generally very responsive. We love talking about this. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a nice day.